Guys, thank you so much for joining me. Again, my name's Mark. I look after yoga for Virgin Active globally. I'm really stoked to be able to, put this together for us. We've had a lot of change across all of our territories, some starting a couple of years ago, some of you guys just diving into this year. So I'm really appreciative of the change that you've gone through. I know it hasn't been easy in some circumstances. I appreciate the commitment to this brand, Virgin Active. I'm really, really grateful of that. And it's been tough, right? We've been in and out of lockdowns everywhere. And this is really just a very small, partly a thank you. I really wanted to make sure that we were able to give you something in return for all of your efforts and commitment, especially this last year. I also hope that these things will continue to grow and develop over the years, and we have more of these sessions happening. So yeah, just a real huge thank you for being part of this brand and doing what you're doing. As we've rolled out this yoga program across the globe, we have seen, or we've heard from you that you would like some more education development in regards to yin yoga, our yoga calm practice, the meridians, the fascial lines. So that's why we have put this session together. So we'll introduce Mel McLaughlin. You can see her there on your screen. I have been very lucky to do my advanced yin teacher training with Mel, and a number of other workshops and masterclasses. Mel might not remember, but I've been following her around here and there. So I'm so stoked that she's been able to join us and share her knowledge. And that's it, really. So I will hand over to Mel, and at any point, if you really need something, pop it in the chat. I'll keep my eye on it. I'm going to drop off just so you're not distracted by my face, and we'll let Mel take over.
So it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Mark, for that lovely intro. And yes, you did dive straight into the advanced training, just all in. So you've heard all of this. So there'll be elements of that in this today. But actually, I'm really pleased to present this fascia and fascia trains and meridian lines, because definitely in my journey, and I've been a yoga teacher for 22 odd years or something. I started with Hatha, Vinyasa, Flow, Bikram. I've done the whole thing. And then I've slowly transitioned to doing both. And then now I'm primarily, in fact, it's all I do, and I specialize in yin yoga. And I teach this to teachers. And definitely in my journey, this lecture that I'm about to share with you today is a big part of why I started running teach trainings, because it was my sticking point too, my Western mind trying to get my mind around this very, Eastern philosophy and also the anatomy of what is fascia and fascia trains and how does that relate to meridians and yin. So this was a few years of study for me, definitely, and continuing ongoing. This never ends. The fascia news today is old news tomorrow. So it's a massive subject, and it forms, I would say, probably 60% of a 50-hour yin training that I would do. So we've kind of condensed this down into a 2-hour workshop for you today. And I've split that into 2 parts. I'm not going to make any assumptions of who's live with me right now and asking all the questions. And the questions are great. There's going to be 3 chances to ask all your questions, and I'll answer them. But there's 2 parts to this. So the first part is laying the foundation, all the groundwork. Like, the reason I started my yin teacher trainings is the big question, why? So I'm not going to make any assumptions that you know about fascia or fascia trains or what meridians are. So I'm going to explain all of that, lay the groundwork and the foundation, and then we'll have some cues and some questions and hopefully answer any really pertinent things there. And then the part 2 is all about the organs and the meridians, so the Chinese medicine side of the lecture today. And again, it's just a brief overview, but it's a great introduction, and it'll set you off on the path of either a really nice recap for you from my perspective, or it's a new introduction to it. So Please ask your questions, and I'm really open to answering any questions post recording as well, if Mark wants to send me any of that. I know you've got your pictures, and we're going to do a screen share anyway, just in case you didn't print them out. And as Mark said, a pen and paper is great. It's a really casual webinar. I've got my notes here too, and my notes up there. So there'll be plenty of pauses, plenty of time to ask things and digest what we're doing. But the first thing I want to say is that Chinese medicine, so what we're going to be talking about today, the meridians, the organs, and how they relate to yin yoga. What I love about it, and I need to set this tone now, is that it's very inclusive and holistic. So actually nothing is separated in Chinese medicine, in the meridian theory, in acupuncture, and in organ theory and treatment. Everything is seen as a whole. The person is seen as a whole, just like in yoga. So, but for study purposes, we have to dissect it and separate it and look at it individually. But what I want you to keep in the back of your mind at all times today, whether we're looking at one fascia train, talking about one pair of organs and meridians, is that actually everything's deeply connected. And I love that. It's very holistic. So we are, for our study purposes, going to look at these things one by one. But as we talk about the fascia, and as we talk about the meridians, and as we talk about the fascia trains, you'll get this big understanding that we don't compartmentalize things. We don't compartmentalize them like we do when we learn anatomy, like the calf muscles, the hamstrings, the back muscles, this joint, that joint. It's actually, even though they're their own things, there is and has to be, there needs to be a connectedness throughout the whole body. Otherwise, you would be a disconnected being. And so I want to show you today how we're really connected and how the fascia trains and the meridians go a long way for us in yin to help people feel whole, complete, balanced. So we're going to be looking at the yin and the yang of things, but we're actually going to put yang aside until we get to the organs and meridians. So this is about yin. This is your yin side of yoga. And some of you might be teaching it and trained extensively in yin. Some of you might have never taken any yin training and teaching it from books and videos and things. And some of you may not be teaching it yet. So this is the yin side of the yang side of yoga. So I'm going to really try to keep it on that track also. So I won't be going off into the yang hatha style of yoga. And it's very science-based. So this is hopefully a very confidence-inducing little moment for you, is that what I'm talking about in fascia trains is science. It's anatomy-based. And then what I'll talk about with the meridians and tie them into those fascia trains is 2,000 to 3,000, there's the jury's out on that, 2,000 to 3,000 year old Chinese medicine. So this is medicine that has stood the test of time and been proven, and you are liable for this medicine. So what that means is that it's sitting at the medical table, which is fantastic for us. It's been given a high place in medicine, acupuncture, and Chinese medicine. So they're saying that it works, and you can be liable for it too. So I want to also put that confident tone out there that whatever I talk about today is based in science as far as science has discovered it and can take it. And then we get to that barrier where we always get to in science and we go, well, we can't explain that. Like, how do we explain what the soul is? How do we explain what consciousness is? How do we explain what happens when we're alive and what happens when we pass on? So this medicine today will get to that point where I'm going to ask you to take that leap of faith with me. And just like we do when we talk about the chakras in Hatha yoga, you know, now they're proving that they're over special glands and nerve plexuses in the body, but we have to kind of conceptualize them and try to understand them on another level as well. And we will get to that point today during the second half of the lecture, and I'm asking you to think about meridians and think about chi and think about how that moves around the body and what chi is. But let's start with laying the foundation. Let's start with the fascia. We have to start there to explain the fascia trains. So everything I'm going to speak about today is from my teacher, Paul Grilly. He coined the term yin yoga, and he's been my teacher for over a decade. And also teachers like Thomas Meyer, who coined the phrase fascia trains, discovered them. He worked with cadavers. This is his work, the fascia trains, and they're the pictures that you'll see. And then there's also the acupuncture side of things. So I did my acupuncture training with a British acupuncturist called Dr. Dan Kian, and I'm not certified as an acupuncturist. I literally did it just to supplement what I understood was happening when we do yin yoga poses. So again, I hope that is really confident making for you that this is coming from old medicine. What we do in those yin yoga poses is it's very mild, slow, gentle medicine, like the slow drip medicine. We're not acupuncturists. We're not sticking needles into certain points for specific reasons, but we are affecting the energy throughout the whole body according to Taoism and Chinese medicine when we do these poses, and I'll explain that. So let's talk about fascia. So what's fascia? Why is it important to us? Where is it? What does it do? This is just a really brief overview, probably a recap for most of you already being yoga teachers and fitness experts. So the fascia is first of all, it is an organ, and I will explain that in part 2. It is now classified as an organ. So your fascia is like your internal onesie. It is ubiquitous tissue. It's everywhere in the body, and there's different kinds of fascia, connective tissue. One of them is fascia, including ligaments, tendons, and the fascia trains that we're about to talk about. So we've got this fascia like a cross-linking network throughout the whole body. It is in every cell. It touches every cell all at once. And so straight away, we've got this material that is omnipresent throughout the whole body. That means it's not a binary tissue like the nervous system is. The nervous system, super important, but it is a yes-no binary system. Whereas the fascial system and network it's everywhere, touching everything all at once. So what happens over here in this finger is known over here in the shoulder straight away, because it's all influenced through tension integrity. So whatever we do to the fascia in one place is known in another. Now, in fascia research, there is superficial fascia, which is this body-wide network of fascia everywhere, around every cell, around every nerve, around every organ, separating, connecting everything. So we've got this superficial fascia everywhere, like a three-dimensional onesie, internal onesie. And then we've got much more organized fascia. I mean, the body itself is highly organized. There's nothing random about our bodies. But then we've got this, we would say, superficial fascia, the body-wide network. And then we've got very organized fascia and deep fascia, which is more like what we will talk about today in the fascia trains, that we are going to separate from that body-wide holistic fascial network. We're going to separate it, dissect it if you like, to look at it one by one. So we're not looking at all the fascial trains, we're just looking at the fascial trains that relate to the 12 major organs and their meridians. And the deep fascia is the fascial trains, the dura mater, which is around the nervous system, and then the cerebellum tentorium, which is your deep brain fascia. So there is deep fascia and the superficial fascia. But when we come to look at the fascial trains, relatively, I'm also going to talk about superficial and deep, but I'll explain that as we go along. But just know that we will be talking about the deep fascia today. And fascia is yin tissue. So we are yin yogis today for all intents and purposes. That's what we'll be teaching and practicing and sharing with our students. And fascia or connective tissue is yin tissue. So the yang tissue is the muscles, and there's a little crossover there with tendons. And then the yin tissue is the fascia, the fascia trains, including ligaments, tendons, and including bone. Bone is just a more mineralized form of fascia. And fascia's got two parts to it. It's got fiber, which is your collagen, which is a protein. It's the most protein we have in the body. So we've got two fibers, collagen and elastin. The collagen gives us our real tensile strength, and the elastin gives us some movement, some malleability in that, but it's just strength and stability. And then there's the fluid side of the fascia, the connective tissue, and that is your water, your lymph, the extracellular matrix, which is kind of like, it's not super watery. It's not like running water out of the tap. It's actually quite a gel-like, almost like a snotty, sticky gel-like substance, which has lymph and fluids and all kinds of things in, including hyaluronic acid, which will be very important to us as yin yogis. And then there's all the cells in there as well. So we've got fluid and we've got fiber. And it's like the matrix of your body. So it gives you form and shape. Now, this is important, is that it contains things, but it also connects things. It contains organs. It contains the whole system of all the systems of your body, like the blood vessels and the nerves and the lymphatic vessels. So it contains everything, but it also separates things where we need, say, separation from air and fluid, it separates things. Where we need separation from organs, it separates things. Where we need separation in cavities in the body, it also separates things. So the fibrous part of fascia is very hydrophobic, which we need. But obviously there's something in the fascial network, which is the hyaluronic acid in the extracellular matrix, the watery, fluidy part of the fascia, and that is hydrophilic. It loves water. So there we have like this water resistant material where we need it, and then we have something in this fascia that actually keeps the fascia really healthy. So straight away there, healthy, hydrated, malleable, gliding, separating, straight away there, it's telling you something about this tissue. So this tissue needs to be hydrated to function well. When it's dehydrated, doesn't function well at all. And this is the point where I hope we're all reaching for our water bottles and taking a sip of water. So the fascia is a very wet tissue in the body, but not because it absorbs water into it, it's because it retains the water, it contains the water. So it's a container and a separator, and it holds our organs onto our body wall, and it conducts this thing called electricity in the body, or we would call it in Chinese medicine qi, but we know our body's electrical, and in hatha yoga we call it prana. So you've heard it always. We've got electricity, which is the scientific term to this animating life force in us, what makes our fiber and fluids come alive and make us who we are. Well, without the electricity, which we can measure in the heart with an ECG, and there is a voltage or a frequency actually to all of our organs. We can measure the electricity in our body. So we've got this electricity. The Taoists back in the day, there was no electricity. So they postulated that this thing was life force, this thing that animated us, it was qi. So we've got these factors now. We've got this fascia network, we've got the fluids, and now we've got this substance that animates those two things, well, the whole body, because fascia's around the muscle, fascia's around our yang organs, our yin organs, around every muscle, around every cell, around every nerve. But there is an animation to that, and that is what we are going to refer to today as qi. It is electricity, and we can make electricity, we can conserve it, we can use it. So just backing up there a little bit about the fascia network, from day 15 of you being created in embryology, from day 15, you are just a tube. You are literally just a mouth and an anus. That's what you are. At day 15, you're a tube of fascia that is slowly being developing and opening itself out from a single cell to a double cell to all the cells. And you start to create this tube, your primitive gut. And at day 15, if the pregnancy is going to continue, this is where it's got a good chance of going to full term at day 15. So the body goes, okay, great. We've got the basics. We've got the gut. This is a fascial tube. And from that moment onwards, what the tube does is it kind of folds in on itself. If you can imagine, I should have brought a plastic bag actually. It's a bit crude, but it's a plastic bag, and you can imagine like pushing it into itself and double bagging. So this tube of fascia kind of double bags itself. And this is important to us as yin yogis, trying to understand what meridian channels are. Because as this tube double bags itself and decides that it's going to now create a human body, a human baby, it creates, as it double bags itself, the very first space within the body. So this is really important to understand, that we have space in the body. We have lots of spaces, cavities, channels, places where if when you're alive, they're present, but when you are a cadaver, you actually can't find them. I'll explain that more in a little bit. But at day 15, what I'm trying to say here is when you double bag yourself and the tube goes in on itself, and between those two layers, you create the first space in your body, that then continues on until the day that you die. So we might fray around the edges, our collagen and elastin might fray, and we get a few crow's feet and wrinkles and shrinkles and things like that. But from day 15, you are one continuous network of fascia from that day onwards. And so I want to keep reminding you that everything is connected in the body. It's not separated. We postcode the body so that we can understand it, but the body has never known separation from day 15 of its development. So from that day to the day that you die, you are this one continuous whole. But as we said, there are other factors. So we do a lot of our research on cadavers to understand the body, but what's missing in a body, a dead body, a cadaver, a body that's passed away, there are two things that are missing in that body. We can see all the tissues, and it's very informative. And by the way, they used to cut fascia away and think it was really unimportant back in the day, and just look at the organs and the bones and the muscles and fascinated by that, but not so much the fascia until about maybe 80, 100 years ago, they started understanding that it had this huge role in the body. And so we're looking at the body as this continuous whole. We've got the fascial network. We've now got these spaces in the body. And these spaces in the earliest way are the channel system that will later on become your meridian network throughout the body. So space is really important in the body. In fact, you're more space than you are fluid or fiber, matter. There's more space in you than anything else. And these spaces in a cadaver, they actually collapse and disappear because there's no water plumping them up and filling the spaces. There's no fluid. There's no snotty extracellular matrix. Everything, all the fluid goes out of the body, and we're left with the dry tissue. And then there's also no electricity. So there's no animating life force. There's no chi in the body. So when we open up the body to look at this ancient thing that the Taoist phrased as chi, where do we find it? Well, it's not there, is it? Because the body is now not electrical, animated, or alive. It's passed away. Whatever was animating that body and making it a living thing is not there anymore. There's no electricity or chi. There's no fluid running around the body. That goes straight away. So we're left with the tissue. And so this has been a little bit of a problem, kind of proving things in the body like the meridian channels. And to keep it really, really simple, the way that they've been proving meridians is, one, the Chinese have been needling them in their medicine, in their emergency rooms still to this day. They needle these channels that we call meridians. It's not a good translation, actually. The better word is a channel or a space. So they needle these and they make people well again. And so there's something in this medicine that we must keep in the back of our minds, proven or unproven. It's proven to the Chinese. They've been using acupuncture for a long time as their medicine, as well as herbs, and now obviously modern Western medicine, which is fantastic. So let me talk a little bit about organization in the body, because organization is really important from day 15, actually from the first moment you're conceived, but definitely when the tube goes back in on itself and we really start developing our primitive gut, then our spine, then our nervous system, brain and heart and things like that. We are a very organized being. This is not a disorganized being. There's a lot of organization in the body, and that is common. So disorganization is uncommon. There's nothing random about your body. And so trying to prove that there is a network of meridians throughout the body, first of all, we say something has to connect the body and connect the toe to the ear, to the finger, to the kidney, to the brain, to the lips, to the chest. Something has to connect all of that. And one of those is the nervous system, but it is a yes, no. And the other thing that we've got in the body is the fascia. And fascia has the proprioception to sense outside of ourselves, and it's also got the interoception to sense inside of ourselves. And so the Chinese said that there needed to be a network of communication throughout the body that shared information, that communicated with one another, not just the organs, but all the body tissues. And so they knew about fascia long before we knew about fascia, and they called it one of their organs, one of their lines in the arms that we'll look at in part 2. But what they were trying to conceive of was how the body was connected. So they knew about this overall connectedness through the tissue, but they also knew about it through the spaces in the body called the channel network, or we colloquially call it meridian network. And I do actually still use that term in my yin classes. I say we're in the kidney meridian now, because people really don't understand. Actually, as a teacher, you probably understand this. We have to use real layman's terms sometimes so that it doesn't turn into a science class or a lecture. So I actually do use the term meridians, but my acupuncturists, both of them, would say that's a bad translation. It's channels. And because we're talking about the science of fascia, I'll keep referring to them as meridians, channels, because I've just told you how those first spaces, those first channels are created in the body through the division of embryology. As you develop, as you maintain this continuous network throughout the body, it's starting, as it divides, it's starting to create spaces, channels. It is the earliest form of the meridians. And that is because your brain cannot not know what's going on with your kidneys. Your kidneys cannot not know what's going on with your heart. This is a system that needs to communicate and support each other. And indeed, in the Chinese theory, Chinese medicine theory, there is a cycle between your organs, and it's called the nourishing cycle. And there's also a cycle called the overcoming cycle, or the destructive cycle. And the nourishing cycle is each organ supporting the next one. And the destructive cycle, it's not a great term actually, because we can use it quite constructively, but it means that one thing overwhelms or overcomes the other one. And I'll chat a little bit more about that in part 2, when I'm explaining each individual organ pair, the yin and yang, and their organs and the meridians. So let's think about, we've got this body now, it's developed into a being, and it needs to stay connected. It's got the fascia and it's got the spaces called the channels, or the meridian network. So as we're growing and forming our organs and meridians, the meridians actually come first. Remember, when the tube double bags, the space comes first. There's no organ in there yet. So there's a space, and as the body continues to grow and these spaces move apart, the body it knows, it's programmed through the DNA, through the cells, through the chi, that for this human being to survive, there needs to be a beating heart, there needs to be a respiratory system, there needs to be a digestive system, there needs to be a water filter, there needs to be a chemical filter, etc., etc. So out of absolute need, the body develops from these spaces organs. And as these organs start to separate from each other as the baby grows, as the body grows, and then postnatally we grow from little babies into big humans, adults, that these spaces continue to grow. And what is created between the two organs is this channel. There's a space there, isn't there, between one organ and the other. As the body starts to grow and separate, this becomes the meridian channel. Now, this never leaves you. It's always there. It's a form of communication in the body. It's a channel of sharing, of nourishment. So on all levels, things are moving through this channel between organ and organ, between tissue and tissue, between body part and body part. So the arms and legs are kind of extraneous in our theory because it's actually head and torso where all your vital organs are. But then we do grow arms and legs. And actually the arms grow out of the heart space. So whatever organs are in the upper part of the body, that's where we see the arm meridians. The organs in the abdomen, that's where we see the leg meridians. So the arms and legs grow out of the torso and they continue their spaces and channels and meridians right to the fingertips. And what's interesting is we grow in parts. So we go from the shoulder, we don't suddenly have a hand. We go shoulder to elbow, and then elbow to wrist, and then wrist to fingers. So it's like the maker cells make the shoulder, then they make the elbow, then they make the wrist, then they make the fingers, and we end up with this long extension. But we've still got that same information in the channels from the network of the organs. So the meridians are kind of an external to internal communication channel. Again, in the fascia and through the meridians, there's proprioception, interoception. So your external world to your internal world. Remember, your organs are very taken care of. They're deep in the body. They're protected. And so the channel system is a way to know what's going on externally, what's going on internally, and what's going on between the organs. And our fascia is yin tissue. So now we know about the fascia and we know about these rudimentary channels that then continue on with us as we grow up through childhood and into adulthood, and we have organs and we have channels and meridians that if you went to an acupuncturist, they would needle along those points, depending what kind of issues you show up with on any given day. This is yin tissue. So when we are in yin yoga, this is what we are addressing. When we are exercising the yin tissue in a yin way, this is the part of the body that we're influencing. We're influencing the fascia and the joints. We're influencing the meridian channels and the organs by exercising this yin tissue called fascia. So it's not that every time we move around, we don't move around the meridians and the chi and the fascia. Of course we do. But what we do when we exercise yin tissue in a yin way is we stay for a long time. Right? We hold it for a little while. And this gives the fascia a chance to remodel itself. So we don't exercise fascia in a yang way, the way that we do up dog, down dog, warrior one, the way that we lift weights or run and take our run a marathon or ride a bike or any of the other yang things we do with our muscles engaged. Yes, that's influencing the fascia to a certain extent, but we're muscularly moving the skeleton around. It is also influencing the chi. We're actually making energy when we use our muscles. We're making chi. And then it is influencing the channels and what energy is running through, or what fluids are running through, or what's moving through the body. But with yin, we have a huge amount of time to remodel fascia. And this is key for us in yin when we do a yin hold. So how do we exercise yin tissue? We hold it for a little while. We hold the poses. So we have long holds, which remodels the fascia and actually writes into the fascia certain posture, certain ways of being in our body that can either be positive or negative, but we have a long hold in there. So the fascia, which is quite a plasticky tissue, it's why we call it yin tissue, not yang tissue, is plasticky, and it takes a little bit of time. So if we think about having a fascial injury like tearing a tendon, that takes much longer to heal and knit together. Fascia fibers take a long time to knit together, and they take a long time to stretch apart. So if we have a fascial injury, we know it takes quite a long time to heal. Whereas if we break a bone, it might heal quicker, right? It's a fascial injury, a soft tissue injury, often takes much longer to heal than say a muscular tear, even though there is fascia all the way through the muscles as well. But it's thinking about the fascia in terms of yin tissue. We exercise yin tissue slowly, patiently, methodically, and over a long period of time. And so we can remodel the fascia. We can spend time there's only two things we do in yoga to the tissues, and specifically in yin yoga. We can either tease the fascia tissues apart, or we can squash them together. And what's happening on one side of the body antagonistically is happening on the other side. So in theory, we're doing both things every time we do a yin yoga pose. We're either squeezing a fascia or we are stretching it. And we do that with muscles relaxed. So then we know that we're influencing the fascia tissue more than the muscular yang tissue. Now, then we can say that if we are influencing the tissue by these long, patient, gentle, non-forced stretches and compressions, then wouldn't we automatically be influencing the fluid in those spaces? Yes. The spaces in that tissue, the channels or the meridians, the space that's there, yes. And also the electricity or life force, prana or chi, would we be influencing that? Yes. So we're influencing the three factors of the fascia when we sit in these long compressions or stretches. And then the other thing we do is we tend to have longer time to have mindfulness, to have awareness about what's happening when we sit in a long yin hold. For example, maybe a breath awareness, or attention to our thoughts, attention to our feelings, attention to the physical sensations and changes that are taking place in the body. So we've got also, not only are we remodeling the fascia, and that's a very physical thing, we're also giving attention to thoughts and feelings. So our mental and emotional body, we're giving it like breathing space. How do we feel? What's really underneath? What are we thinking? Or how is our mind? So we're bringing this calm mindfulness, attention, awareness to ourselves as well, which then goes on to have amazing stress buster effects, like it lowers the blood pressure, it brings the heart rate down. So then we've got this parasympathetic nervous system side of ourselves that comes into play when we work with the fascia, when we work with long holds, when we exercise this tissue in a yin way. So then we've got this interruption, maybe, if you like, to the normal yang activity, go, go, go. We slow down, we calm down, we become mindful, we become present, and this cascade of effects happens through our bodies of this lowering the blood pressure, lowering the heart rate, lowering the stress hormones. We interrupt that normal for a moment, the high rev, and we come into our more resting, digesting side of ourselves, our playful side, our parasympathetic side. And an interesting fact about fascia, just one little fact about emotions and thoughts and hormones and stress, is that fascia is hugely impacted by our stress hormones, by adrenaline and cortisol. So adrenaline is the immediate, and then the cortisol is the long term. But fascia, what fascia does in the presence of stress hormone in the body is it tightens. So we have a twofold effect by stretching the fascia and remodeling it, but also this parasympathetic side that we put ourselves in also helps us to stretch and relax. So that's a twofold way of influencing our fascia. When there's not as much adrenaline and cortisol in the tissue, the fascia doesn't stiffen and tighten, it softens and relaxes, because adrenaline would tighten the fascia to make it ready to fight or flight. To make it, remember we talked about the fibers of fascia, the collagen is so strong, it's pound for pound, it's stronger than steel, just a fiber collagen, a collagen fiber of collagen. So imagine that stiffening and tightening, we get this stiffening and tightening effect all throughout the body. Why is that not good for us? It's okay in brief moments if we're going to go and run off that stress or fight it off or whatever, you know, response we're having to the stressor. And adrenaline's not bad and cortisol's not bad, and being momentarily stressed is a normal human experience. But when it goes over a long amount of time, it starts to really affect how stiff and tight we hold our body. Now, we've just spoken all about, well, what's in the fascia? What does the fascia house? Well, it houses every single of your 70 trillion cells in the body. So that covers all the body systems. But it's also got these channels, these spaces in it that would carry our electricity, our life force, our chi. And imagine that being clamped down on over and over again over long periods of time. That doesn't feel very good in the body. And it starts to bring us into a more disorganized state, that if the electricity and chi is not flowing around the body appropriately, we're going to start seeing excess in some areas and deficiency in other areas, an imbalance, if you like. And the Chinese would say that all disease is caused by an imbalance of yin or yang. So if we can think about our life being a line, it's not linear, but let's think about our life being a line like this. And this is the balance of yin and yang in the middle. This is the Tao. This is the middle path, the balanced way. This is where we're holistic, healthy, dis-ease-free. And yin is on this side and yang is on this side. And of course, we just kind of walk that middle path. And sometimes we're necessarily a bit more yangy. Sometimes we're necessarily a bit more yinny. But if we go too far over here and we stay over here for a long amount of time away from this balance, then we would create a deficit over in the yang side. There'd be an excess of yin or an excess of yang. And so they say that we try to kind of stay around this middle path, balancing our yin and our yang, our masculine, our feminine, our action and our rest, and all the qualities that we can talk about, yin and yang. We try to balance those out as best we can throughout our life. And they say that when that balance is there, then we'll have a beautiful, harmonious system, body-wide, and on all levels, so mentally, emotionally, and physically. So we're always trying to come back to this balance and look for this balance. And that'll become a little bit more apparent when we look at the organs in part 2. But just backtracking a little bit to our fascia, I want to talk a little bit about fascia trains in a second. I think we're there now. And then that'll explain a little bit more about the meridians and where they are. And this is where we have to take that little bit of a leap of faith about what the meridians are, what the channels are, is that they do convey energy and information. They carry things around the body. But I'm going to relate to a channel now, like a river. So I want you to think, and in old text, the translation is rivers for the meridian channels. It's like they talk about these rivers flowing through the body, very fluid and carrying everything in the river. But what if we think about a river and what it does? We can think about a river, and in the river itself, there would be life. There's water flowing through the river, and there's things that live in the water, and that's the water is sustaining life, and the plants that are in the water and the living beings that are in the water. So that's the river. This is the full flow of the river with all its life and energy in it. And then just outside the river, on its banks, there would be things that were sustained by that river, like the animals and the people and the plants that live on the riverbanks. And then the riverbanks would sustain a little bit further out, like say out to the villages and the towns that would surround a river. And in fact, in olden days, they actually used to build towns up around rivers. So we've got this beautiful river itself, which holds life and energy in it, but it also sustains everything around it. And I think this would be a great time, Derek, if we could please, just to do a screen share and show the superficial backline of fascia, because I'm not actually going to show you any meridian paths today. So introducing Thomas Meyer now and the anatomy trains. And these are my posters that I use in teacher training. But I wanted you to get now a visual of what I'm talking about. So remember that this is what we would consider in the body deep fascia. But relative to the deep backline, we are looking at the superficial backline. So we can see a picture of the superficial backline here, and underneath it is something called the deep backline, which is narrower, shorter, and deeper underneath. But what's interesting about fascia is anywhere you go in the body, it is 7 layers deep from the skin down to the bone, and even bone has fascia around it. So anywhere you go in the body, at minimum 7 layers deep, the top layer connected to the second layer, connected to the third layer, all the way down to the 7th layer means that 7th layer is connected to the first layer through these 7 layers of fascia. But we have, or he actually, did dissect all of these fascia trains out of the body. So Thomas Meyer dissected these fascia trains and coined the term trains of fascia. And he said that these are so important in our movement, in our functional movement, because they actually connect the whole of the back chain together. Nothing is separated there, is it, as you can see? And the superficial back line is the longest line of fascia in the body. You can see that foot is lifted on the skeleton because it starts on the sole of the foot, and you can see it travels up the back of the legs, dives into the pelvis, goes straight through the sides of the spine, skull, over the skull. And if you look at the third picture along, you can see that side view, it goes over the skull and actually ends here in the eyebrows, the first point of the urinary bladder channel, which we'll talk about in a sec. But that is the superficial backline of fascia. It is dissected to show you that it is a line of connective tissue all by itself that is deeply connected to every other bit of fascia in the body, to the deep line, to the superficial fascia, to the 3D onesie. In some way, this superficial backline is communicating to the heart, it's communicating to the wrist by the interconnectedness of the fascial web. But for our study purposes, and for Thomas Meyer to explain this to us and how this works. So the anatomy trains are amazing for functional movement. We're using them only from our perspective to show the meridian channel. So I want to read, let's leave that up there to keep a visual of. And I want to read you a quote from Thomas Meyer himself, the man, and he is highly regarded. He's one of our top fascia people in the world. Some of you might have been lucky enough to see him at conferences in Australia and work with him, or do online things with him, or even have his amazing book, the Anatomy Trains book. This is a well-loved book, great for people who work with people's bodies, movement specialists. But for us in yin yoga, we are relating this to our yin poses and the meridian channel specifically. So Thomas Meyer said, the acupuncture channels of the East are the fascial trains of the West. And another woman called Helen Langevin, who works out of Harvard University, who's a huge fascia expert too, and a neuroscientist, she's done a lot of work on fascia and consciousness and neuroscience. She also said that our fascial trains that we're looking at today are the closest physical patterning in the body that we know to the more esoteric acupuncture channels of the East. So they're both saying the same thing. And indeed, my teacher, Dr. Dan Kian, who's my acupuncture teacher, he's actually a GP and he worked in the emergency rooms in China for 7 years or so. And he's from a family of surgeons. And in one of his books called A Spark in the Machine, he relates the meridians very much to the blood network. It's way beyond me to explain that. And definitely today, he's amazing. So that's a great book to read if you want to relate it anatomically to kind of veins and arteries and major pathways in the body. But Thomas Meyer goes on to say, a fascia train is an organized, soft tissue pattern in the body connecting one body part, muscular and or skeletal, to another for movement and stress transference. It follows a meridian path according to traditional Chinese medicine and modern muscle meridian theory. So we're not so rude to say that this superficial backline is the kidney and urinary bladder channel. We wouldn't say that because the channels are they're quite complex, but this is the journey that they take through the back of the body, those two specific meridians. And we will recap this in part 2. This is the first slide that we'll look at. But just so that you know that 2 meridians are related to this fascia train. 2 meridians are related to all the fascia trains that we'll look at in the lower body and 3 in the upper body. So I wanted you to see that this is a connective tissue, literally. We're not post-coding in yin. We don't sit down in a forward bend in yin yoga and say, we are going to stretch the hamstrings. We wouldn't speak like that if we knew about the fascia trains and the meridians. We'd say, if you sit in this forward bend today, so you can see if we flex at the hips and we start to put a strain on that back chain, the superficial back line, and this is a healthy strain, that we could say that stretch can show up anywhere from the soles of your feet right up to your forehead, anywhere along that superficial backline, and you will be working in your kidneys and urinary bladder channel. You will be remodeling what connects the whole back of the body, including the muscles and the skeleton. You will be reestablishing a line of communication and force transference through the body. This means you're going to move better, you're going to have more energy, your organs that are related to this fascia train are going to function better because there'll be more chi flowing through them and there'll be no adhesion. So adhesion, stickiness arises from either an injury or surgery, scar tissue, or just from dehydration. And we can get dehydrated both from not taking in enough fluid, but also we know this as yoga teachers from not moving enough. If we don't move the body, these tissues, if we don't squeeze the tissues and stretch the tissues, they don't have a lot of chance to unstick themselves. So again, particularly important that we keep this tissue hydrated. So if you're a yin teacher, not yet telling your students to drink water after a yin class, it's commonsensical when we do a hot, sweaty power class, isn't it? But not so much maybe when we're doing a yin class, but the fascia is highly dependent on water. Now, when we think about electricity, what conducts electricity really, really well? Fluid. So also if your body is sticky, stuck together, dehydrated, those spaces that should be a space in the body have got stuck together because there's been no movement around the superficial back train, there's been no hydration, there's been no movement for hydration, then it all gets stuck together. The meridian channel is not going to work so well and the energy is not going to flow through the body. My yoga teacher, Paul Grilly, says that he and his teacher and his teacher's teacher, they believe that the yoga postures were created to keep the energetic body healthy. Because why else would we do all these elaborate stretches and movements? Yeah, it makes the body feel, nice and stretched and good, but it has a huge impact on our energetic, electrical side of our body and its health. So let's leave the superficial backline up. I'm almost done with part one. I can see it's almost time. I'm just going to check over anything else. I do want to read you something. I know I've just literally read you Thomas Meyer's little spiel about the fascial trains, and we've talked about the analogy of the river. So if you look at the superficial backline there, if you could imagine two train tracks running up the back of each leg. So two channels running, either one's medial, which means it's closer to the midline of the body, and one's more lateral, which means it's further away to the outside of the body. But if you could think about two channels running up the back of each leg, and then they dive in to the torso, and the kidneys actually go really deep into the deep back line, and the urinary bladder channel stays on the outside in two channels, and they continue up flowing through the back line. That's what I want you to imagine, because we're not looking at the meridians today. It's way too much for today's lecture. And relating it to the yin poses, this is what you want to visualize and think about, that those meridians, those channels are held, supported by this fascial tissue when the body is alive, when it's full of fluid, and when there's electricity in the body. We're just looking at the dry cadaver fascia right now, which is, you know, it's just a part of the story, but it's great to visualize. As soon as I saw this in my trainings, I really understood what was happening in a forward bend, and that it didn't matter where in that forward bend in yin yoga, the stretch feeling is showing up. It doesn't matter if it's in the back of the Achilles, in the hamstrings, in the lumbars, in the base of the skull, on the top of the head. It doesn't matter. Anywhere along that train could need a stretch. And I'm doing the little air commas because really stretch is not the right word, but it feels like a stretch. And so water conducts electricity really well. That means that if that fascia train that you're looking at now, the superficial back line is moved well in all directions, is hydrated through movement and fluid, being enough fluid in the body, then that electricity or chi moving through the kidney urinary bladder channels through the fascia trains is going to be conducted much better than if you had a sticky, dehydrated scar tissue in there, adhesions, knots, blockages, anywhere muscular, chronic muscular tension that's pulling on the fascia. That also creates like a roadblock to the chi running smoothly through the back of the body. So that's important for us in yin from all those three perspectives, from the tissue, from the electricity, and from the fluid. And I'm going to end this little section, and then there's time for questions. Just, you know, we've been racing, I've been chatting at 100 miles an hour. So I'm just going to read you this last little bit. And this is from our oldest Chinese medicine text when they're trying to explain what channels and meridians are in more of a modern term. And the question is asked, could you provide a basic definition of the term channel? And the answer is, and this is translated from the old textbooks, narrowly speaking, that the definitions of the channels are pathways and might be thought of as spaces within the fibrous connective tissue of the body. In a larger sense, the concept of channel refers not only to the spaces, but also to everything wrapped within them. In this definition, the concept broadens to include not only the spaces within the connective tissue, but also the structures and fluids held and brought together by these connective tissues. A channel is then like a river in that it includes the riverbanks and also the complexity of life within the water itself held by those banks. In the body, the channels are groupings of connective tissue that bring together the blood vessels, bones, lymphatic vessels, nerves, tissues, and interstitial fluids within their purview. So just like we talked about the river, if you can imagine those channels running up the back of the body in the trains that we're looking at, but also a little bit like a hose pipe with holes in, whatever energy, whatever that is carried through there in that tissue is actually watering everything around it. as it goes along, like a hose pipe. It's taking, like the river takes care of everything right out to the edges. So does the meridians and the fascia trains and everything that the fascia holds within its spaces, the fluid, the meridians, the chi. So there's great health there when that is free and free flowing. And the two things we can do to that tissue in yin yoga is squeeze it. So either do a back bend on the superficial back line or stretch it and do a forward bend. And then we've got lateral bends and twists, which will also affect this. But your two big movement patterns for the superficial back line are a forward bend primarily, that's the archetype, or a backward bend, which squeezes it. So the tissue likes to be squeezed and stretched. It's like a sponge. We squeeze it, and the squeezing is good because it pushes all the crap out. And then when you release the sponge, there's new space in the sponge and all the good stuff comes in. So this tissue likes being squeezed and stretched. So I also want to say, as yin yoga teachers, don't think it's only stretching. It's not. Stretching is important, but so is compressing. And compression in yin is not bad unless it's accompanied by bad pain, because there is good discomfort and pain, and there's also bad pain. Again, a little bit too much for this lecture. So I think that's a really good moment to, I'm just going to check my notes that I said everything I wanted to say in this section. And I've been reviewing it and being very repetitive and repeating myself on purpose as I've gone along. So, okay. Let's just check in, because I've been just looking at myself and chatting to myself for that hour or so. I'm just going to check in and see if Mark's got any questions at this point or anything that needs to be clarified. And I can do that before we go on.
Hi, Mel. We've got a question. Can you guys hear me? You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
We've got a question from Katie here in Sydney. And she asked around, had a question in regards to the word stretch. She's been taught to avoid the word stretch because the connective tissue in her understanding doesn't stretch. So she says, my understanding is that it is stressing the tissue, not stretching. And she would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Wonderful question. Thanks, Katie. That's why I was doing the air commas about using the word stretch. But what it is actually tensioning the tissue. So yes, in yin yoga, when I talk about this in my training, we talk about stress being a positive thing on the tissues, because when you put stress on any tissue, it elicits a response from it. So when we don't stress the superficial backline, you're correct, it either gets underused. If we stress it too much, it's overused, and that's damage. So we actually call it, the real word, what we're doing when we do a forward bend on the superficial backline in the fascia is we're actually tensioning it, pulling it apart. But it's not correct actually 100% to say we don't stretch it. Now, Thomas Meyer, about 6 years ago, said we have to be very tentative about stretching the connective tissue, particularly ligaments and tendons, because that's part of the connective tissue. But now connective tissue has collagen and elastin in it. And this is a really big subject that we talk to death when we do the big fascia lecture. But there is a little bit of give in connective tissue, and it does need to be stretched. So when you deform collagen, Katie, which is what we're doing when we tension, stress the tissue, or we squeeze it, it's actually stressing it in both ways, whether we're squashing it or pulling it apart, is we're deforming the collagen, which gives it a chance when you release it to reform in a better, healthier way. You're giving it space, you're giving it fluid, you're giving it energy to remodel it. And this is how we can change posture with yin yoga and yin type stretches and holds. But the reason I called it a stretch and not a stress is, I don't know if you teach yin, but if you walk into a room and tell your yin students you're about to stress their superficial backline, what does stress immediately bring into someone's brain is stress. So while we know as teachers, we know the why behind everything we're saying and doing, I think it's beyond the scope of teaching a general public class to say, you can say it feels like a stretch. You can say when we pull the tissues apart, it feels like we're stretching. It's not really a stretch, but I want you to go to that point where that shows up in your body, because otherwise, how do we explain what the sensation is that they actually should be feeling when they're sitting in a forward bend? If we say to them, you should feel like you're stressing the tissue, that means different things to different people as well. So pain is very subjective, discomfort is subjective. So one person's pain is not another person's pain or stress. So it's a really tricky one. And I've struggled with it as a teacher and a teacher trainer all these 10, 12 years that I've been doing yin. But I think the best thing to do is just do your best with layman's terms, colloquial language, and say it feels like a stretch. When we're pulling the tissue apart, it's a stretch feeling. If you can get your head around it and you're smart enough with your languaging and you don't confuse your students, then I think you can, and we should be educating our students. This is not calling it in, sit in a forward bend, stay for 5 minutes, come out and I tell you, there should be education. We should know why we're doing what we're doing in yin. So we have to cover the fascia, we have to cover the chi, we have to cover the meridians and organs, maybe if you want to talk about that. But we definitely have to keep people safe, and we definitely have to give them an idea of what they could be feeling in a pose. So I completely agree with you. If I was running a teacher training, I talk about stress and I talk about tensioning. I use the proper language. But to walk into a class, I mean, some of my classes have 50 to 60 people in them, and some of them are beginners and some of them are seasoned yogis. And so we know we've got the whole range. We have to say something that they can understand in sensation, that they can translate it into their own body. And when you stress fascia, it does feel like a stretch. When we successfully relax our muscles enough that the fascia picks up the slack, so starts to tension, then that does feel like a stretch feeling, doesn't it? It feels like you're stretching. So it's a tricky one, but that's my best answer for that, is that we are stressing the tissues, absolutely 100% correct. But what does it feel like, and what language are you going to use quickly, easily, without it being a science lesson or a teacher training, every time you walk into a room? And that's where workshops come in really handy, because you can do things like this in yin workshops, and I highly recommend that you run them for your students who want to know more. Does that answer the question?
We have got an affirmative, Katie, and she thanks you. She says absolutely. We've also got a couple of other words that people have put in here as well. Release being one of them, creating space, extend. So I think those guys were just sharing some of the other language Beautiful. That they use.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like we're melting. I sometimes use the word, it feels like we're melting, because when we get to a resistant barrier, suddenly the whole body just releases and you kind of fall into your forward bend 3 inches. Where were you 3 inches ago? So I love those words like release, because we can't just keep saying relax in a yin class either. We have to find ways of describing what is happening in the fascia as we understand it. So not only as we understand it in our bodies, but what is happening in the fascia as a substance when we're stressing it appropriately. So shearing, melting, softening, releasing. I love all those words. They're brilliant. Other ways to describe a stretch feeling, for sure. Thank you.
And we did have another question from Lee in South Africa around, we are teaching classes based on meridian pairings, I guess the focus of the class. Right. Is there an easy way to be able to know which fascial line that is associated with or closely connected to?
Oh my God, thank you so much, Lee. That is part 2. That is the whole part 2. I've got such good information for you, absolutely. And So I just decided to separate them out because I know that was a big dump of recapping fascia and fascia trains and qi, and I'm trying to do it from a scientific perspective and also a Chinese medicine perspective and meridians and acupuncture and things. So I wanted to separate them out, the two, and not keep dipping back into one and the other. So all we've literally done so far is literally lay the groundwork for fascia and fascia trains. Part 2, we're going to talk about the organ pairs related to each fascia train individually, and we're going to, even though they're all connected, we're going to individually talk about them, and that's what we're going to use the rest of the time for. So I think you'll be taking lots of notes for that section, Lee, and thanks for asking the question.
All right. I think that is all the questions that we have right now for part 1. I can see a couple of people have asked, is there a recording? So I just wanted to let everyone know that we are recording this, and you'll be able to get that later on as well. So if you do have to, I know some of you have to duck off. So if you do have to rush off, that's totally cool. You'll be able to watch the recording. I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Mark. So yeah, that's important because I mean, there was a lot in that, and I did jump around a little bit to try and explain things because it's really tricky to explain fascia without explaining qi, without explaining fluid, and then try to relate that to the meridian without talking about embryology and how these fascia trains are even created in the body. They don't just magically appear, you know, they're a part of your development and they never leave you. And what's interesting about the fascial spaces that we've been talking about, and the very last train that we look at, I'll explain this in more detail, but there is the spaces in the body, and this is where the science comes in, that I want you to be really confident when you talk about the fascia and confident when you talk about the meridians, that we are actually influencing this. And I call yin yoga medicine. It is organ medicine, because we directly influence the meridians, because we're directly influencing the fascia that they sit in. And what's interesting about surgery in the Western world is surgery, keyhole surgery, is using these spaces within the body where the body separates and creates a space. In that space between my hands is a channel or a space or a cavity, and that is where they put the camera in, and they do keyhole surgery through these fascial planes and trains, because it's a space in the body. So they're not cutting excessively through blood vessels and nerves and tissue damage. So we know that keyhole surgery healing is vastly quicker than the old method of surgery. There's not as much damage, and you're in and out, and it's done quickly, and it's safe as surgery goes. So there's much less recovery time, and there's much less fascial damage, because they actually slip in. Say there's 2 bits of paper like that, they slip in between those 2 bits of paper. There's a space in the body. And that's kind of what we're talking about here with the fascial spaces, is what surgeons are using as keyhole surgery spaces. So just so that your mind can kind of hang on to the fact that we're talking about real things here, but we're always talking about them in this lecture in a living body, in a live, animated, full of chi and electricity body. Once that body's passed away and we start looking at cadavers, it's very hard to see these spaces, which is why they missed them. They missed these spaces for a long time. They couldn't see the energy channels, the meridians, the acupuncture channels. They couldn't see the energy because there wasn't any. The rivers had disappeared once the cadaver dries out. But what they have done, I'll just be really brief about this because I really want to move on to part 2, is they've measured the electricity in the spinal column. They can measure your voltage in your spinal column, sushumna, the central channel. They've also measured the electricity running along the meridians in these patterns that we're about to look at. They've measured the electricity in the separate organs. So there is a measurement of these things. It's not a random thing anymore. The body is not random, it's super organized. And East and West are starting to say the same things now about the fascia trains and the meridians, about the channels and meridians and the keyhole surgery spaces in the body. I'm going to come back to that right at the end because it's the last channel that we look at when I talk about this interstitial fascia, and I'll speak a little bit more to that then. So this might be a good time to get a fresh page in your worksheet, and I've got the posters here and I might point to the bits on the poster, but if we could please, Derek, have back up the screen share of the superficial backline, that's where we're going to start. So another reminder that we keep separating the body just to look at it. It's all connected. The channel network is connected and the fascia network is connected all the time. There's never a moment when it's not, okay? So we're looking at the superficial backline, and Lee asked this question, so that's great. This is your kidney and urinary bladder meridians. So we're going to look at each fascia train, and then we're going to look at the organs and meridians. And with the organs and meridians, just for those of you that don't know, each organ is a pair. So we've got the 12 major organs. We've also got them as pairs. So postnatally, that means when you're out of the womb and you're fending for yourself in the world as a baby, everything in your body has to function, doesn't it, on its own? You have to breathe, you have to digest food, you have to poop, you have to temperature control, you have to do all of these things now for yourself postnatally. So we're talking now about postnatal and 5-element theory acupuncture. And just a reminder that we're not acupuncturists and we should never take that pressure on ourselves. The only reason we're talking about Chinese medicine is because it's linked to the yin tissue, the yin side of ourselves, and these meridian channels and organs. So just like Hatha Yoga has Ayurveda as a sister science, we can draw on the science of traditional Chinese medicine because it goes so well with our fascia, which houses the meridian channel. So I hope that's making sense. Why are we looking at Taoist philosophy? Why are we looking at traditional Chinese medicine? Because it is the yin tissue that houses the acupuncture channels. So then we are going to have a direct medicinal tonifying effect on those organs that pair with the meridians. So we've got organ pairs. Now, it would make sense, but I'm just going to say it anyway. In the superficial backline, you can write down on that poster that you've printed out or on your notebook, superficial backline equals kidney and urinary bladder channel. Because we've got 2 bladders in the body. We're talking about the urinary bladder channel. And the kidneys control our water through kidneys and the bladder. So they're a pair. Now, the kidney organ itself is in your lower back. You've got 2 kidneys. Some of you might only have 1, but you'll have 1 or 2 kidneys in your back. And then at the front, you've got your urinary bladder. We know where our bladder is because we feel it all the time, right? Especially at 2 o'clock in the morning. So we've got kidneys at the back and we've got the organ of the urinary bladder at the front. They're a yin-yang pair. Everything postnatally to function is paired up together, yin and yang. So the kidneys are yin organ, and the bladder, because it's a container, a tube, and it excretes toxins, is the yang. So yin is kidneys, urinary bladder is yang. They are a pair together. Now, it doesn't matter where they are in the body, the channels run through the superficial backline. Now, I'm being very rudimentary about the channels. I'm not being rude. I'm just like keeping it really simple. The energy flow, the river that nourishes everything you see in that superficial backline and around it, everything that fascia holds and serves in its space is nourished by the kidney and urinary bladder channel energy. So those 2 train tracks going up the back of each leg, diving into the torso and following the superficial backline is kidney and urinary bladder channel energy, qi. From a Chinese medicine perspective, now we're in Chinese medicine. And it's not just one channel. So the kidneys are a channel. There's one channel on each side of the body. So there's always a meridian on both legs, a kidney meridian on both legs, a urinary bladder channel on both legs, kidney channel 2 in the body, 2 urinary bladder channels in the torso. So we've always got them on both sides of the body. It doesn't matter where the organs are placed, but the channels are not one straight line. They do run through this tissue, but then the kidneys will go to the kidneys, and the urinary bladder channel passes through the urinary bladder channel. And just to confuse you even more, the urinary bladder channel also passes through the kidneys, and the kidney channel also passes through the urinary bladder channel because they're a pair. Now, I don't want to get too much into this Chinese medicine today in that respect, because that'll start to get really confusing. Be confident, understand, and know that in the superficial backline is your kidney and urinary bladder channel as a whole. That's the general pathway of the movement of the meridian and the qi in that channel. Yes, it's got branches. Yes, it diverges to the organs, and obviously it goes through its own organ and it goes to its opposite organ. And these meridians will also pass and cross through other channels and organs, because just like the fascia is not disconnected and it's all connected anywhere you look in the body, the meridian network is not separate lines. Think of it like one big line through the body that's only separated by little gaps like bridges, tunnels. They intersect through each other. They chat to each other. They share information. They share energy. They share what's going on outside and inside. They can, according to Chinese medicine, rid the body of pathogens. So there's certain pathogens that might arise in the body that turns into sickness or disease. Like they talk about cold, they talk about heat, they talk about phlegm, they talk about wind, etc. So the channels are ways to move that energy through the body and release it also, any pathogen. So all the good stuff and all the bad stuff. But the organ itself is also nourished by its own meridian. And there's communication by its own channel. Remember I said in embryology right in the beginning, that was what that whole elaborate talk was about. When you start moving organs away from each other, the organs have spontaneously arose to fulfill a function in the body that now has to function for itself outside the womb, but those channels stay connected to the organs as they move apart like that. So then I hope it's all starting to make a bit more sense now, but just know that Chinese medicine is vast and huge and complex. We are making it so simple today, and it's taken me years to wrap my head around this, and I am still a baby at Chinese medicine. And my acupuncturist is 60, and he considers himself still kind of a newbie in that world. So just a bit of perspective for you, that especially if this is new for you today, watch this a few times, write it down, understand it, Google it, have a look, start to theme your classes around it, will help you to understand. So that's what all this second part is about, just as Lee said, how are we going to put this together? What does it mean in yin? And then do we have new theories now and theming and sequencing? Absolutely, yes. So you've got the superficial backline, you've got the kidney and urinary bladder channels running through the superficial backline because they need a home. They're a river, they have fluid, they have electricity, they have qi, they need a home. They're not esoteric, floating somewhere outside the body. There's an esoteric element to them because it's qi, it's life force, it's energy. What is that? I don't know. Great if you can answer what consciousness is, what animating life force is. I mean, then we're close to explaining really what life is. What is that spark of life? What animates us? What is your soul? What is the spirit? What is consciousness? But there's 3/4 of this that is, you can tangibly get a grip on it. So when we're looking at the superficial backline, I already said the kidney and urinary bladder channel. And the kidney is more medial, the urinary bladder channel more lateral, but just know that anything you do to this superficial backline is stimulating the kidney and urinary bladder. Now, those two organs have very different jobs in the body. But when it comes to speaking about them, they're a pair, they work together. So when we talk about the physical imbalances and attributes, and energetic mental imbalances and attributes, we're talking about them as a pair, as a whole. So we're not going to separate them now. I just wanted you to know, obviously, they're two different organs in the body, and they control physically, they have a lot of control over our water. The adrenal glands sit on top. So when I tell you about the imbalances and attributes, you'll maybe understand this a little bit more. So I'm going to tell you about the season. I'm going to tell you about the element. I'm going to tell you about the archetypal poses that we would use, and then just add a few little tidbits on, and then we'll move on to the next one. So kidney, urinary bladder, the entire back of the body from the soles of the feet right through to the eyebrows. And interestingly, the superficial back line is the longest fascia train in the body, and the urinary bladder channel is the longest channel in the body. It's called the superhighway. And of course, it's sitting in the longest fascia train because it is its home. So there's another correlation for you. So we have an imbalance in kidney and urinary bladder channel. I'm just going to call them kidneys for now. And we usually do defer to the yin organ when we talk about the pair. So I'm just going to talk about the kidneys now in the back of the body. And the season for kidneys is winter. The element for kidney is water, and they do control the water, and that's why they were given the water element as under their care from the Chinese. Our archetypal pose for the superficial back line is a forward bend, the tensioning that Katie was talking about, the stress that Katie was talking about, that I said feels like a stretch. So we're tensioning the back line, we're stressing the back line by bending forward and pulling on it, pulling the two ends apart from the soles of the feet to the skull and right through to the eyebrows. We can also, secondary, we can squeeze into it. We can squash the back line. That would be all our back bends. But the primary poses are forward bends. But why wouldn't you do a whole class of forward bends? Because as a yoga teacher, we're always working with vinyasa krama as well, intelligent sequencing, and a class full of forward bends would feel terrible for that person's body when they got up off the mat. They'd feel so unbalanced, just anatomically. So we always have to keep that in the back of our mind. Do maybe one or two forward bends, maybe throw in a twist and then do a little back bend and then do another forward bend, then maybe end on a lateral bend. And that way you're still working the whole superficial line, but it's not just forward, 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 forward. We have to have counter pose. We have to have respite. So we've got the winter season, we've got the water element, we've got the forward bends as the archetypal movement linked with some counterposing back bends, maybe some twists and lateral bends. I like to put those into a kidney class. And the imbalance that would really imbalance kidney is fear. And that's linked with the adrenaline and the adrenal glands. It's fear that would imbalance the kidneys. And this is fear that is common to all humans. So survival fears. And the attribute is, they call it wisdom. And it's overcoming those survival fears. It's overcoming just surviving and actually being able to move forward in life and thrive, have enough energy. So when we're just surviving, there's no energy for anything else. When we're in fear all the time and we're just paying bills and working and burning the candle at both ends and all those things, anything that puts us in a fear state of survival, there's not much thriving in there, is there? There's not much extra energy. So the attribute is the wisdom. It drives us forward. It really allows us to come to terms with survival, to come to terms with being afraid of life. It comes to terms with our past and our future, actually. And there's a huge nod here to your hereditary past. So what is passed on in your genetics and DNA. So I just want to mention that, but I won't go into it. So this Qi in the kidneys are all about growth, development, and fertility. Decline and aging. So you could say this is an anti-stress class. Anti-fear brings you out of that fight or flight of the adrenals. Very anti-aging because it's linked to growth, development, fertility, which declines as we age past, 18 or something. And stress and overwork can also weaken the kidneys because the kidneys like rejuvenation and rest. Think about winter, hibernating, being internal, etc. Resting, being less out there and social, if you like. And just a little nod to sequencing and theming. Yes, we can sequence and theme in our winter season around kidneys and urinary bladder channel. But if we only do kidney and urinary bladder channel all winter, we would also agree maybe that the physical body would start to feel a little bit unbalanced. So we've got to keep in mind all the time, actually, what are we doing with the physical body? Because we're yoga teachers and our primary attention is the yoga and then everything else around that. So we wouldn't only do kidney practices all the way through winter. We might go to the opposite season and practice a summer class because it balances out the deep winter of us. If we're getting really wintry, really introverted, introspective, cold, still, stagnant. I mean, they're good things to come in and replenish and reset and rebuild your chi, and your fundamental chi is kidney chi, your fundamental chi and your energy. But maybe every now and again, we might bring in an opposite practice to balance that out. And can we only practice kidney, urinary bladder channel, water practice in winter? No, you can practice it any time you need it for any of those reasons. I mean, how many of us have been stressed and overwhelmed over the last 18 months? How many of us have been put in a false winter, in a false hibernative state with lockdowns and things? How many of us have been put in a fear state? Doesn't matter which season you're in, you might have needed this kidney and urinary bladder practice because of the imbalances that were showing up, what was presenting itself in present time. So yes, we are beings and we are part of nature and connected to nature. So when we do kidney practices in winter, it's like the season itself, our external environment is supporting us. But we also have to keep a broad mind about, are we balanced? Is this a balanced practice? Is my body feeling okay? Okay, I might be in spring, but I actually need a kidney practice because I've been overworked, overwhelmed, really stressed. I've had a traumatic event. I'm dealing with some trauma, etc., etc. So I just wanted to throw that in there. I won't repeat that through the whole of them, but we can practice seasonally, winter, water, kidneys, and we can also practice to balance out in other seasons or any time we need the medicine of kidneys. Okay, there'll be a little bit of time for questions at the end again. Can we now change to screen 2, to slide 2, please, Derek, which is the superficial front line has just popped up. Amazing, thank you. Now we've gone to the complete opposite side of the body, so the antagonistic side to the superficial back line. And the superficial back line and front line, they do need each other to balance each other out, okay? So the superficial front line runs from the top of the feet and it runs straight up the thighs, across the pelvis, dives into the pelvis and then goes straight through the torso and carries on up into the sides of the jaw here. So the superficial front line is from the soles of your feet right up into your jaw. So anything you do with your head, if you lift your head, you're going to stretch the front line. If you drop your head, you're going to squash the front line. But these are your spleen and stomach meridians. They are a yin-yang pair. Your stomach is the yang because it's a container of the food, and your spleen is the process. It's the yin, the dense organ. So the yin-yang pair, stomach is yang, spleen is yin. So spleen's on the interior, the medial, when we're looking at the front line, and the stomach is on the lateral because it's more yangy. So anything yinny is more inside and protected, anything yangy is more outside. So again, you've got the 2 meridians on each leg up the front, spleen and stomach, and they run straight up the front of the thighs, and then they dive into the torso, continue through the stomach and spleen, but the channels are on both sides of the body, and they carry on up to the mouth and the eyes as a meridian. But if we wanted, the only thing we've got, because we're not acupuncturists, we're not sticking needles in, we're not palpating, the only thing we've got in yin is either to stretch, to stress and tension that front line, feels like a stretch, or squash it, compress it, fold it in. And that's how we will affect the stomach and spleen meridians. So this organ pair doesn't have a season of its own, because we only have 4 seasons, but we have 6 organ pairs. So this doesn't have a season of its own. It is actually the center of all seasons. So every time we change a season, so in the Southern Hemisphere, we are going from spring to summer. In that changeover period, this is the time, the center of the season. This is the time for stomach and spleen. Or any time we need deep nourishment. That's what this is about. It's a very practical pair. It's your stomach. You are what you eat. What's going in becomes you. And that can be translated into a wider sense of what comes in at life becomes you, and can you digest it through the digestive system of stomach and spleen. So what are you watching? What are you listening to? You know, what's coming in at you? Who have you got in your surroundings? What is your surrounding like? What are you eating? What are you drinking? So it's nourishment on all levels. The archetypal movement for this superficial front line is a back bend, to pull apart the front of the body. So laying over a block, reclined butterfly, saddle pose, anything, any back bend or lunge, because the lunge would do, if you can see there, the lunge would do the lower part of the body. The lunge would go over this part and stretch this part of the train, and the train is all connected, so it doesn't matter which part. So you could do lunge patterns, or you could do a back bend that stretches the whole thing, and then a back bend where you lift your head or prop your head back would pull on the fascia train from the jaw, and your legs are flopping over to the floor at the back. So back bend, there's your movement pattern. That's your primary, anything that opens the front side of the body up from feet to chin. And then the counter pose would be forward bends. So squashing, squeezing, compressing in the front. And then you can also do a side bend, because that's going to affect it. And you can do a twist, because that will affect it. But the primary is back bend. It's a tricky pair actually to teach and to get into, because you're navigating around knees and backs. So I would say this is the trickiest fascia train to actually practice in yin. It's the big poses like saddle pose. So we have an earth element. So your stomach and spleen is the element of earth. So groundedness, nourishment, really nurturing yourself, coming back to center. Remember, it's the center of all the seasons. So every time we need to regroup and come back to center to feel cared for, nurtured, nourished, this is your element, this is your fascia train, and this is your organ pair, stomach and spleen. And just good digestion of all aspects of life here. The attribute and imbalance. The imbalance is anxiety. So we've gone from the back chain of big common fears to everyone, and we've jumped to the front chain, and we see anxiety show up here, this like worry at the stomach, this ruminating, this constant thinking and worrying and anxiety, and it puts us in the future, whereas the kidneys kept us in the past with our fears and our memories, and the spleen puts us in the future with our anxiousness and our we don't know what's coming. So the balanced aspect of stomach and spleen is clarity and confidence. Even confident and clear about what you might not know. There's no point in worrying about the future, because we don't know about it. So it's confidence and clarity that you are centered, that you are grounded, that you are in the center of yourself and at home in your own body. So that's that pair. And then if we could have up, please, Derek, we need both the lateral line and the deep front line, but we can have one at a time if you like, whatever comes next. If we can put the two up together, that would be great, but I don't think so. So whatever's next, the deep front line, beautiful. Okay, so the next pair we're going to look at, oh, he's going to try to do two together. That's fancy, maybe. We'll see what happens. So the next pair that we're going to look at is the liver and the gallbladder. Now these, I wanted the two lines up now because these are the anomaly in the lower body. They're the only meridian pair that is split between two fascia trains, just to keep you on your toes. So most fascia trains have two or more meridians in them. These are the exception to the rule. So you can see on the left there, on your left, we've got the deep front line. And I did say that relatively, we have the superficial lines and we have the deep lines, but this is all deep fascia. I just want you to keep that in your mind. But relative to the superficial front line, now we're seeing the deep front line and then the lateral line. So the deep front line on the left is where your liver channel lives. And the lateral line on the right is where your gallbladder channel lives. Now, liver, gallbladder are a yin-yang pair. They just live in separate fascia trains, which is a rarity. So the liver is the yin organ. It's the dense doing organ. And the gallbladder is the container, the hold of the bowel. So just the container yangy aspect. So I've got liver, gallbladder. The season is springtime. So those of us in the Southern Hemisphere, this is where we are right now in present time. We're in spring and the element is wood. So we've got this wood. And what liver gallbladder means is to be able to be really stable and flexible like a tree in a storm. It's rooted, but it goes with the flow. So that's what liver gallbladder brings up for us. And the movement pattern here is legs apart and legs crossed, and then side bends and twists. So anything that catches that lateral line, so a lateral bend, a side bend, a twist would catch it, and then the liver would be stretching or tensioning the legs apart, the deep line apart, or squeezing it in, legs crossed. So legs crossed, legs apart. And then also when we cross our legs, we'll be in the outside of the lateral lines in our hips and glutes. But, you know, for teaching purposes, I do sometimes refer to muscle groups, but I always say to my students, we're in this long chain of fascia on the outside of your body. And when, say, for example, deer pose is a great pose for the lateral line, the gallbladder channel. And I say, you know, you might feel it as a stretch feeling around your glutes and around your outer thigh, your IT band and your hips, but it's actually all the way through your body. So if you want to reach your right arm across with your right leg forward, you'll continue stretching through the line. I try to keep my students' brain very global, just like the fascia train looks. And that's why I wanted you to have a visual. I wanted you to see how the fascia connects. So if you turn your head in the lateral line, you're going to stretch and influence what's going on over the hip because it's connected. So to have a really global view of these lines is really important. Then you can translate that in your language, in your target areas, and how you teach this in poses to your students. So legs crossed, legs apart, things like deer and frog and dragonfly on the wall or on the floor. And then things like double shoelace and twists and side bends in any way with any lower body part. All fantastic. Mermaid poses, banana poses. This is all of this. So we've got spring as a season, wood as an element, and the attribute and imbalance for liver and gallbladder, the imbalance, the thing that would imbalance, upset the liver chi is anger. And under the umbrella of anger, things like rage, frustration, irritation, resentment, all of those things. And then the the soothing, healing balm, the wholeness, the completeness, the resolution is the compassion and the kindness, first towards yourself. So compassion and kindness helps to quell this anger and resentment, this kind understanding, just that extension of kindness. And the liver is really responsible for circulating all the hormones around the body via the blood. And it's our big chemical detox factory. So when we talk about spring as a season, we can relate that to like spring cleaning, detoxing, etc., etc. So when we're looking at theming, we keep all these things in our mind. Beautiful. Thank you, Derek. We can get rid of those and go to our very last slide, which is the arm lines. Slide number 5. And what you'll see there is the front and back arm lines in one picture. But we've finished with the lower body now. So there are 6 organs and 6 meridians, 3 pairs in the lower body. And now I've gone to the upper body, but there are also 6 organs and 6 meridian pairs in the upper body. So we're going to cram all those into the arm lines. So all we've got with the arm lines is the front arm line as a fascia train and the back arm line as a fascia train. The front arm line comes across the chest, goes down to the belly, and the back arm line goes across the back and the shoulder blade and down towards the waist. So it's not just the arm, it's going through the chest and the upper back. But each fascia train, so the front arm line, we'll call it the front arm line, what you're seeing on me now, this has 3 meridians and they're all yin. And on the back of the arm, as you can see on the right-hand side of the picture, the back arm line has 3 meridians and they're all yang. But they still are partnered in pairs. You know, it gets really mind-blown and complex, but they're still partnered in pairs because we still need form and function outside of the womb. So up here, the first pair that we're going to look at, so we'll have one of the meridians on the inside of the arm and one of the meridians on the outside, because this is yin and this is yang. And the first one we're looking at is the heart, which includes the pericardium sac and its partner, the small intestine. So nothing simple in Chinese medicine. So we've got heart, including pericardium, and we've got small intestine. So the heart and pericardium are yin organs, yin lines. And the small intestine is a tube, it's a filter, it's the yang, it's the doing aspect. So we've got the yin heart and pericardium and the yang, the small intestine. They work as a pair. Now their season is summer. And their element is fire. So this is where we see our most external, extroverted, warm, connected, loving, benevolent kind of energy here. And your heart meridian runs from your pinky to your chest, down to your heart and through the small intestine on both sides. Doesn't matter which side the actual organ is, you've got the meridians on both sides. So you must do both sides of the body anyway for balance, right? Then you've got the pericardium channel, which is the very middle center of the arm. It goes through the pericardium and it goes right down to the abdomen. And I'm going to explain that in a second. And then we've got the small intestine channel, which is on the back of the arm from the pinky. So we've got the heart from the pinky on the yin side and the small intestine from the pinky on the back side. So we've got this yin yang pair on opposite sides of the arm, but we've also got an added fire element of pericardium because we don't separate the pericardium and heart here. So this is all to do with blood flow and circulation and heat energy and fire and this aspect of us where the Chinese would consider is the house of your spirit. So a spirit house. And a lot of the points on the heart channel are related to, you know, spirit gate, and on the pericardium, the inner temple gate and things like that, because your heart sits at the center of all of your body. It is the monarch of your kingdom, if you like, the king or queen of your own personal kingdom. So the heart is very protected, very taken care of, and it has the last say in everything that goes on in the body according to Chinese medicine. So we don't treat it so much per se, but there is an imbalance and an attribute here. The imbalance is to be cold-hearted, depressed, shut off, closed down. That would be the job of the pericardium, to close your heart off. And the balance side, the attribute here is very joyful and connected. So two very different imbalances there. And we can see a lot of mental disorders because they consider your spirit, your consciousness. So your mind, spirit, consciousness, mind is housed in the heart. So mental disorders and things like insomnia and nervousness come up around imbalances of your fire element or the heart. So any pose that stresses, stretches, or compresses the inside yin side or the outside yang side of your arms is going to work as a movement pattern here. And even though yin yoga is primarily focused on the lower body, we do a lot of like spinal work, hip work, leg work. We must not forget about the upper body. It has 6 of your meridians, one of which is your heart. So we must do some arm work. So things like open wing, thread the needle, any pose that crosses your arms, cuddle pose, any pose, just reclining back over your bolster that opens your chest will catch all the yin meridians, all the yang meridians. So we are very repetitive when we come to the arm channels and the arm organs and what poses we do. But I have successfully done many a masterclass, 2 hours of yin around the upper body, the shoulders, the arms, the chest, the upper back. So you just got to get creative with it around your poses, but there are many, many poses. And then we don't forget about the lower body when we do an upper body class in summer, for example, or when we need a bit of fire balance, or when we're experiencing any of those imbalances to bring ourselves back to balance. We might do a heart, small intestine class. So we just get creative. We do some lower body. We might be in shoelace in the lower body, but doing a side bend and stretching the fascia of the arm and shoulder here. We might be in half frog pose in our lower body and doing a thread the needle to get the back of the arm and shoulder face down on the floor, etc. So I hope that's making sense from a yin pose and theming. I'm expecting here at this stage actually that you do know some yin poses as I'm talking as well. So that is the fire element, including heart, pericardium, small intestine. We'll keep the arm lines because the next pair that I want to look at, so there were 3 meridians in that section in the summer season of fire. There's only 2 last quick sections and I'm going to whiz through these because I know we're almost at time. But the next one is lung, which is on the inner arm near the thumb, comes on the thumb side of the inner arm. It's the lung channel, goes through the lungs into the large intestine. And then the large intestine on the thumb side at the back of the arm crosses over the shoulder and goes through the back, as you can see on that fascial train. So lung and large intestine are a yin-yang pair. Yin is the lung organ, and yang is the large intestine relative to each other. I know there's space in the lungs, but they are more yinny and they're filled with alveoli and air and they're more dense. And then the large intestine is just your large intestine and your colon, and it poops out all toxins and reabsorbs the water. So we've got the yin yang pair there working together as taking in and letting go, taking in and letting go, like a big macro cycle, and then the microcycle is your inhale, exhale here. So these are the autumn seasons. So those of you in my northern hemisphere, this is your season that you're in right now in November. So you're in autumn and this is your season. This is your metal element. And we don't really have metal in our elements in Hatha Yoga, but metal means to be upstanding, upright. It's very precious metal in the body. It's very in the past, they related metal to lung and large intestine because your lungs are the first line of defense to outside external viruses and pathogens. So if you have good metal, if you're upstanding, if you're really bolstered in your breathing and your nose and your lungs and the ability to fight off viruses and airborne infections and things, then they would say you had good metal because you were very upright and strong. It's a strength, and metal was expensive back in the day and you didn't have it unless you were really wealthy. So they say a person with good lung qi is a very wealthy person because you have your health. So for all of us in this pandemic time, lung health has been really important to us, our respiratory health. And then for those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, this is where you are. So any pose that we've talked about, anything that opens the yin side where the lung channel runs and the yang side where the large intestine channel runs, anything that opens the arms, closes the arms, stretches the arms up, crosses them over, they're all going to work the lung, large intestine. What makes your classes different when you're reusing, recycling poses over and over, and we have to in yin, even in the lower body, we have like 30 or 40 yin poses, we have to be super creative, is that how you speak about the philosophy, the fascia train, the attributes, the imbalances, the season, the qualities, anything that goes with lung, large intestine, metal and autumn is going to make that class an autumn class, is going to make that class a metal class. The movements might be quite the same. So it's our first line of defense, our lung, through the nose, the breath, and then it's vitally important that we poop out the toxins as well, right? If that gets clogged up, the whole system is poisoned. So one is not more important than the other, and they work together as descending energy. And the breath nourishes every cell in our body. You know, we don't live very long without our breath. This is a really vitally important aspect of ourselves. The attribute and imbalance to finish off is grief and gratitude. So anything that makes us grieve heavily, like sadness, loss, any kind of loss or sadness prolonged will affect our lungs. And again, it kind of relates to the life season that we've all been thrust into over 18 months about, you know, maybe being in a little bit of grief. So we also might have weakened the system that needed to be really bolstered at this time. So I'd highly recommend doing some lung and large intestine work, doing some shoulder work, some chest work in your yin practices and for your students at the moment. So grief would imbalance us and make it hard, you know, make it hard to breathe and hard to be inspired and hard to live. And then the gratitude, and that is, it's a tricky one because how long is grief and how long should we grieve? And, you know, that's very personal. But gratitude in Chinese medicine would, gratitude and courage, this bolstered courage to keep living, to keep moving forward, the gratitude resolves the grief. Oh, I'm grateful I had it anyway. I'm grateful I ever had it or experienced it, instead of I'm so sad that it's gone or I've lost it. So the gratitude brings about a resolution that we're still grateful we have a life and we can move forward in that life and be inspired. And then the very last thing I'm going to talk about is the very last channel. If you've been taking note, you'll notice we've done the 3 yin channels and only 2 yang channels on the back, which is the small intestine and the large intestine. But the pericardium on the inner yin channel also has a partner on the back arm channel, and its partner is called the triple burner or the triple heater. And I said it right at the beginning of the lecture. I'd cycle back to this and explain it, because in Chinese medicine, they used to call it the organ with no form. But I told you at the beginning of the lecture that fascia is an organ. And so it's just been named the new organ 2 years ago. So fascia is now an organ, like the skin is the organ that we can see on the outside. The fascia has now been named an organ, but it's been given a special name, and it's specific to the fascia in the torso, and it's called the interstitial fascia. And so what the triple burner is, that the Chinese were so smart, they never did a dissection, they didn't open the body, they'd never seen a kidney when they knew what the kidneys were and what they did in the body and how to treat them. And it's the same with the triple burner. They knew about this interconnectedness of the whole body via the channels, but where did the channels live? So the triple burner is the fascia. And it's talking about the 3 burning spaces in the torso, because like I said before, we can live without our arms and legs, but your torso with all the vital organs in your head is super important, right? So we have a burning space in the chest, we have a burning space in the upper belly, and we have a burning space in the pelvis and lower belly. They're called burning spaces because transformation of energy takes place there. So we have the transformation of energy in the lower belly that then goes on to transform the energy in the upper belly and the digestive organs. And then the transformation of that digestion feeds the upper organs, the heart and the lungs. And the fascia circulates this energy and warmth and chi. So it transports and moves and warms and keeps all your vital organs nourished, warm, content, and with the right kind of energy in the right place. But we can think of the triple burner as the fascia-wide network. So the Chinese were correct. It's like an organ without any form or shape of its own, because the fascia only takes on the shape of whatever it's covering, i.e. your body. So if you just took your fascia out, yes, it would look like your body. That's because it's been in your body shape, but fascia on its own doesn't have a shape. So I know that we're ending on something really abstract with the triple burner or triple heater, but this is really important to acupuncturists. They would needle this most times you go and see them, because anything that's going on in any of the organs is kind of taken care of by the fascia, by the transportation of heat and chi and energy and nutrients in the fascia. So if there's an imbalance anywhere, it would be intelligent to address the triple burner that is addressing all of the organs in the torso. So this is the interstitial fascia. It's been given a name by Western medicine, and this interstitial fascia is the spaces, the places, the cavities, the channels that what was I saying earlier about the camera surgery? The name has just completely flown out of my head. Keyhole surgery. So keyhole surgery is done through the interstitial fascia to the main vital organs in the body, in the spaces, so there's not any damage, there's not a lot of bleeding, you recover really quickly. So I wanted to just finish bringing that all together in that way. It doesn't have a season and it doesn't have an element, because it is the fascia that's everywhere all the time doing everything. So we wouldn't lump it in with one particular season or time or element, because it is everything and everywhere. So it's a good note to end on, because we started with the fascia and we end in the channel that is known as the fascia in Chinese medicine. It wraps it all up nicely. And so you can see then, I hope that we've got this like really rich pool of information to draw on when we are theming and sequencing a yin class. And I hope that I've given you a little bit of background to why you're doing what you're doing in a yin class, with stressing the fascia in these long holds, these long quiet holds. And with everything I've told you going on in the organ pairs, what I wanted to add with that is you must give your students some time to contemplate what is going on in the body. So we don't tell them everything we know about all the organs and the seasons and everything that's happening. We give them a little bit of time inside every 3, 4, 5 minute hold, just to contemplate mentally and emotionally all the concepts of what's going on in the kidney channel in a forward bend, and everything that means to them as a holistic person on all 3 levels, mentally, emotionally, and physically. So we've got this rich pool when we understand the Chinese medicine and the fascia and the meridians behind our yin poses and what we're doing in yin. Now, just finish on a quote from my teacher, just as like a blessing from my teacher, the guy who kind of brought yin back into yoga in general, Paul Grilly. And he says about the fascia and the chi, long after the bloods and fluids have moved in or out of an area, the chi flow is what leaves us full and content, and it moves through the free flow of stretching connective tissue and its rivers, the fascia and the meridians. So thank you for your kind attention. I know that was a lot. It's been my pleasure to share that with you, and I'm okay to stay for those last few questions, Mark, but I know I just went, 15 minutes over, so I'll leave that to you.
Thank you so much, Mel. We do have a couple of questions. Do you mind? Yeah, I'll shoot them to you. We've got one from Seema. Her question was in regards to nadis versus meridians, and how are they different?
Well, they're only different in the number and the size. So something I didn't chat about in this lecture, but it's a great question, is there are 72,000 nadis according to Hatha Yoga, and there are 14 actually meridians. We didn't speak about the over-governing yang meridian, the over-governing yin meridian, because it really wasn't relevant to our lecture today per se. So say there's 14 meridians in Chinese medicine, but 72,000 nadis in Hatha Yoga. How does that relate? Well, they do relate actually. And when you put them over the top of each other, we start to see some real similarities. And the similarity that we get down to in the end is we get down to the central channel, Sushumna. It's called the Great Channel in Taoism, or Sushumna with Ida Pingala either side of it in Hatha Yoga. So we don't have, we have the urinary bladder channel running up and down the spine. So we do have channels and meridians, just like they have nadis and spaces, and they are energetic channels that can be purified through breath, etc. But when we get down to the nuts and bolts of it around the spine, which is your central nervous system, which is where all the energy is eventually going to converge to have a kundalini rising or awakening, to bring all the energy through all the 7 chakras. It's the same in Chinese medicine. They're actually trying to make sure that we are, I held up the pen at the beginning and said we're walking the middle path. Well, the middle path is the great channel where everything's balanced yin and yang. Sushumna in Hatha Yoga is the central channel where Ida Pingala goes side to side, but eventually they're going to come into balance, and you'll have a Kundalini awakening when all the energy is in Sushumna. So it's the same with Chinese medicine, except we go from front to back. We have all the yang up the back of the body and all the yin up the front. In Hatha, they have it left to right. We have it front to back. But the same purpose is we get these 72,000 nadis, and we get the 14 major meridians down to 3, then down to 1, the central channel. So they are the same. It's just that yogis the Hatha yogis from India had many, many more. They were quite chaotic. They had lots of gods and goddesses, lots of energy, lots of nadis, lots of chakras, whereas the Chinese were much more rigid. They want to bring everything down to yin and yang and the Tao, which is yin and yang balanced. The symbol of yin and yang. That's the balance of the both, yin in the yang, yang in the yin, and they're all complete in the circle. So the Chinese just want everything really structured, organized, and simple. Yin yang, the Tao, central channel. Same within Hatha Yoga. Eventually it comes down to Ida Pingala and Sushumna. And so there's that's the best way in 2 minutes I can explain that similarity. So I hope that was helpful. Was there a question about where they can find more information about that?
I think that was a question around where can they find the recording. So we'll make sure we get the information for the recording, guys. We will make sure that gets out to your leaders, and then they'll be able to share that with you directly. We did have a couple of questions from Margot, and her first one was around, obviously understanding that creating space, stretching or tension to create space. What is the benefits of squeezing or compressing the fascia?
Beautiful. The meridians don't know the difference in the stress. It's only the tissue that knows the difference. That's such a good question. And I did briefly say it, but I was rambling on it like 1,000 miles an hour. It's like we're squeezing a sponge. So what was the name of the person who asked the question?
Margot.
Margot. So Margot, when we squeeze the sponge like a compression, say you go into cobra, I'm going to say that just the general term, the cobra pose, or in yin it's sphinx or seal pose, and you go arching up into a back bend and your arms are stiff. So you're squeezing the area of the lumbar spine. The squeezing is just the tool. And obviously then you're tensioning the front side, but let's stick with the compressing, the squeezing. It's like you've squeezed a sponge. So when you squeeze the sponge, everything's come out, everything's been squeezed out of it. So fluids, stagnancy, this is a great question, because stagnancy to the Chinese is the worst thing that you can have. Stagnancy creates dis-ease, and stagnancy to the Chinese is pain. So if nothing's flowing through the fascia, through the tissues, through the meridians, they say we have stagnancy, and it's pain, and it can also lead to dis-ease. So it's like we squeeze out the stagnancy of those lower back tissues when we're in a back bend. That's a compression. Now, the effect is when we let it go. That's the benefit of a compression, a squeeze. You let it go and everything's been squeezed out. So you've created some space. Now, all the stagnancy has started moving. Now the space for fresh fluid, energy, electricity, and nutrients to come flooding in and fill that space. So it's a very refreshing feeling to the tissues, but for the meridians, they don't care whether you stretch them and let them go or squeeze them and let them go. They're still stimulated. Just like Katie said earlier, it's still stressing the meridians and the fascia. So stretch or squash, they don't care. That's a physical thing that we do to the body to keep it healthy and balanced in the physical tissues. But the energy, the meridians, they don't care which one you do. They're affected exactly the same whether you squeeze the tissue or stretch the tissue. There's still going to be a big flush through the channel. And I'll just briefly say that that's, whilst we need the quiet time in the poses, that's also why we need the rest after we do a pose. So we call it in the yin yoga world, the rebound. What's rebounding? It's when you've squeezed or stretched something, and then you just go and lay back and relax in a really like neutral anatomical space. So anything that needs to rush in or rush out or move around the body, the plasticity to remodel itself, gets a moment of rebound after every pose.
Beautiful. We do have another question. Actually, her name is actually Kaylee. She's just logged in as Margot. She just let us know. So it's actually Kaylee. Kaylee's second question was around the difference between yin and yang meridians. So do yin meridians have the opposite response to being stretched or squeezed when compared to yang meridians?
No. And again, that's a great question that I didn't cover, because it started to get into a little bit more acupuncture. So as an acupuncturist, definitely yes. So what I love actually is where Kaylee's mind is going. And this is what happens. It kind of opens your mind, and then you've got all these questions, and they're fantastic questions, because it means to me that you understand what I said, because it's eliciting these questions. So if you're an acupuncturist, you can stick a needle into a yin channel and have a very different effect. You can make it more yinny or more yangy, and because the energy flows in different directions. And the same with the yang meridian. You can make the energy, you can influence the energy to flow yin or yang, excessive, less. So that's a really smart question, but we are yin yogis. We don't have needles, and we don't have these specific acupuncture points that mean something along that meridian channel. And there are many points, very powerful points, that would change something instantly along that channel and the fascia. But we rely only on slow drip, gentle, soft medicine over time. But it's not that it's less effective, it takes longer in yin, because we're working with stretching and compressing. We're not throwing a dart straight into the issue like an acupuncturist would. But if you do a forward bend, a backward bend, a side bend, and twist every day, you are therapeutically moving that tissue and influencing how the chi moves in the meridians. Because we can't override the fact that Qi is extraordinarily intelligent, and we should never try to override it. Qi made us from one cell into everything that we are today. So Qi is highly intelligent, Kaylee, and if you squeeze the tissue and meridian and then release it, the Qi will decide what to do in that channel. It'll go, oh, God, I've been a bit stagnant. I need to get moving. Or, oh, I've been racing at 100 miles an hour. I can slow down now because she just opened the other channel up. And that's the thing about the meridian network being connected. If you have an excess in this channel, there'll be a deficiency over here. And then we start to balance out the channel. So moving your body in all the movement patterns, all ways, all days, a little bit of yin would move this meridian network and eventually help to balance it out. And then there'll be times when we're sick, or we've got scar tissue, or we've got some kind of mental emotional thing going on, and we could go and see an acupuncturist or an acupressure person for that, and they can fine tune that. But these postures in yin will give you this overall general medicine that allows the qi to do what it needs to do in the meridians and the organs.
Okay, they are that's the questions that we've had so far. Guys, if you have any more, throw them in. But look, I just wanted to say, Mel, thank you so much. I think that was such an incredible session, and we've had so many positive responses in the chat saying the same.
Great.
I think you've made what is really a massive topic, right? It's huge. And you could, as you are studying this your entire life. But I think what you've given us here in such a short time is so much and so easily understood. So I'm very, very grateful to you for spending your time with us. Also, super grateful for all you guys across the globe for spending your time with us as well. We've got you from every country. So I'm very, very grateful. For those that are watching the recording as well at a later time, also thank you for putting in your time to watch the recording. If you do have further questions that pop up over the next little time, why don't you just shoot them through? You could shoot them through to your head of yoga. If you want to shoot them through to me directly, mark.seeto, SEETO, at virginactive.com.au, if you wanted to send anything through. But yeah, otherwise, thank you, everybody. It's been a really great moment. Special thank you again to Mel. Thank you for Derek in the background as well, running the technical side of things. That's not really my game or Mel's game. Derek did a great job. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It was my absolute pleasure. I mean, I'm passionate about it, and it was hard to squeeze what I wanted to squeeze in, and I hope I kept it simple. And if there is any burning question, because I know what that's like. I remember doing my first teacher training, and I had questions for 9 months before I went back for my second teacher training, and it was like burning a hole in my brain. So if there's any real questions that people really didn't get their head around, or were like, oh my God, she just has to answer that, I'd be happy to do that over the next week or so, and just flick back a very generic, all the questions answered in one. So for sure. But thank you for inviting me. I feel so lucky to have shared something I'm really passionate about with so many people today.
Well, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Derek.
Yes, thank you very much, Derek. Thank you, everybody. And we look forward to doing this again very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I'll talk to you soon.